Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for our extended producer responsibilities. So I'm Jill Crawford, I'm a Senior Associate in the Planning Environment team at Irwin Mitchell, and I'm joined today by Liz Gray, who's a Director at Rambols, and she deals with circular economy and resource management. So my talk is going to focus on legal aspects of the extended producer responsibility, its concept and purposes, where's it come from, how's it impacting on waste packaging and how we deal with our waste, and then looking at the consultation that was concluded by government in October of last year. That was on the new waste packaging regulations, looking at key issues and takeaways from that consultation, and then enforcement risks and non-compliance and impacts for businesses on that. A quick overview of the PPWR with Europe, because they've recently had a vote on amending their waste directive, which covers waste packaging, and then a quick comparison with our new proposed regulations, and then to conclude, embracing the future. So if you could move to my first slide, please, Jemima, thank you. So what's the purpose of EPR and what does it mean? Well, the OECD, which is the Organisation for Economic Development, defines extended producer responsibility as an environmental policy, and the approach is the producer is responsible for a project and that product, and that's been extended to the post-consumer stage of a product's life cycle. So it's been widely adopted by governments and countries across the OECD membership and beyond, and it's currently most commonly used for electronics, packaging, vehicles and tyres. But the success of the EPR in increasing material recovery rates has triggered a debate about expanding the use of it even further to additional product groups. But that's within the OECD. And it'll be interesting to see if the UK government, when it reviews the new regs coming out, hopefully next year, to see whether it's going to extend that as well. So here in the UK, EPR is an adopted policy approach as well, and it's gained significant traction within the UK and the devolved. I say the UK, I include the devolved nations as well, due to its effectiveness in addressing several critical environmental and waste management challenges. So the need for EPR really comes from several factors, which is reducing waste environmental impact, and it shifts the responsibility for end-of-life product management from from businesses and consumers back to producers. So this encourages companies to design products in ways that are easier to recycle, reuse or dispose of in a more environmentally friendly manner, and thereby reducing the overall environmental impact of those products. So it promotes sustainable practices by holding producers responsible for the entire life cycle of their products, including post-consumer waste, and it hopefully incentivises the development of more sustainable packaging and product designs, and this can lead to reduced resource consumption and waste generation. So as financial responsibility, EPR policies often require producers to bear the costs associated with collection, recycle or disposal of their products, and this approach helps internalise environmental costs, which were traditionally borne by local governments and taxpayers. There's a waste management efficiency to EPR. It can lead to more efficient waste management systems by integrating producers into the waste management chain, which hopefully will result in better recycling rates, and more innovative waste management solutions. So also reduces government burdens in terms of financial and operational burdens of waste management from municipal governments, and this can free up public funds for other critical areas like education, health and infrastructure. There are global challenges, environmental challenges that we're all aware of, and EPR is a response to global challenges like climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss, and it's hopefully promoting an environmentally friendly design and disposal of products. And finally, regulatory compliance is also a response to EPR's response to increasing regulatory pressures both domestically and internationally as governments implement stricter environmental standards and sustainability goals. I think I've covered all of those there. Oh, yes, public awareness and education. I think EPR focuses public attention on waste, and there is an educational element to that as well by people understanding, because I think there is much more public awareness of recycling, what we can recycle and what we can't. And so I think EPR also focuses public attention on waste and all the packaging waste in particular that's being generated at the moment and how is it disposed of. So next slide, please, Jemima. So EPR is part of the legislative framework for the EPR came through the Environment Act 2021. So the Environment Act sort of introduces the legislative framework for government to introduce it into UK law, and it sets out the powers and mechanisms through which EPR can be enforced and managed. So under the Environment Act, the EPR schemes can be developed for various product categories with a focus on ensuring that producers of these products are responsible for their end-of-life impact. And this includes managing the waste generated from their products and potentially contributing to the costs of waste management. And the primary goals of EPR contained within the Act are to reduce the amount of waste generated, promote recycling and other forms of recovery, and minimise the environmental impact of products throughout their life cycle. So whilst the Act itself doesn't actually give detail of the regulatory framework for EPR, it does provide the legal authority for the government to develop and implement these schemes through secondary legislation and regulations and guidance, which we'll come on to in a bit more detail later on. So the development of EPR schemes under the Environment Act, when the Environment Act came out in 2021, it was expected that it would involve lots of consultations with various stakeholders, industry representatives, environmental groups and local authorities to ensure that the schemes are effective and feasible. And that's absolutely crucial because it needs to have consent to an extent from all of the stakeholders for the actual policy to work, and then when it's being transposed into law, that it's going to be effective and complied with without too many issues occurring. And that's been evidenced by a number of consultations that the government have put out to the public and stakeholders recently, over the past 2 or 3 years. And whilst it doesn't seem that much progress has been made, I think in the background there's quite a bit going on in terms of bringing the regulations into law. So EPR also under the Act as well is in alignment with the government's circular economy, and the Environment Act is part of the broader move towards a circular economy in the UK, and that's where the value of products and materials are maintained for as long as possible and waste is kept to a minimum if possible. So the EPR scheme as well, also under the Act, is anticipated to drive innovation in product design and encouraging producers to design products that are easier to reuse, repair and recycle. And I think that was a criticism which I will come on to later in the consultation. The government didn't really give enough focus and support to that, and obviously there needs to be support to businesses to drive innovation in this area. Next slide, please. So this going to look at now the overview of the existing waste packaging regulations and the amendments that have been made to that. I think the slide blank, sorry. Oh no, there it is. So initially we had the, and they're still there, the 2007 Producer Responsibility Waste Packaging regulations, which were transposed into UK law from the European Directive on Packaging Waste. And they're still there, and they've been amended several times over the years. But in 2023, we had the Packaging Waste Data Reporting England regulations, and they were introduced, and they've introduced new requirements for packaging producers in how they collect and report data. So I'm not going to talk about anything to do with the technicalities of the new regs and existing regs and what's coming next. Liz will be dealing with all the technical aspects of it. So just going back to the existing law in this area. So the latest, the 2023 regs are all part of transposing waste packaging into the EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. And it's been a slow process, and there's been delays which the government have been criticised for. And just looking behind some of the reasons why this delay might be, and this is just me thinking and not necessarily correct, but there have been multiple consultations on this and criticism that, you know, a lot of time and effort has been carried out by businesses and other stakeholders in responding to these consultations, and then nothing happens. So, I mean, the multiple consultations could, I suppose, be said that it suggests a commitment to a thorough review and of stakeholder engagement by the government. The government does appear to be taking into account a wide range of perspectives, including industry, environmental groups and the public, in order to shape an effective EPR policy. And level of engagement could indicate a desire to balance various interests and address potential challenges in the implementation of these new regulations. And there will be challenges, even the draft ones that were out to consultation last year. There were definitely challenges in implementation with some of the suggested approaches there, all contained within the draft. And the UK government's pace and method could suggest an acknowledgement of the complexity in these regulations, because they are very complex. I found the 2007 regulations quite complex, but the new proposed ones coming out hopefully next year are even more complex, and I think there needs to be some acknowledgement by the government of that. But maybe the delay is because they do acknowledge that and they're willing to invest time in getting the details right. We can but hope. So businesses, though, have often cited uncertainty caused by the delay, because it does create uncertainty in business when you don't know exactly what's happening and when it's going to happen, and particularly in the deposit recovery scheme, that's been delayed and now they've kicked the can down the road back to 2025, and problems with Scotland and the devolved nations as well. So it does cause problems. So it can make it challenging for businesses to plan effectively and allocate resources. That's the fallout from that, and make long-term investments as well. So companies in sectors like manufacturing and packaging, retail and waste management are normally particularly affected, as they need to clarify or receive clarification on the regulations to adapt operations and business strategies. So certainty is definitely important to business, but we haven't had that so far from the government. So the consultation responses in 2019 and 2021 were finally published by the government in March 2022, and they acknowledged some of the things that the feedback that they've had from stakeholders. So the March 2022 review was quite important in shaping how government go forward with this, and some of their key responses I'm just going to quickly run through, because I think they show how it's going to shape the future of the EPR policy and introduce legislation to include packaging waste as part of EPR. So the respondents, the government have sort of summarised the respondents' responses. So and they've acknowledged, the government, the rationale behind excluding packaging solely for business use from household disposal costs. There was a concern about the burden on businesses to prove packaging is for business use only, and that's contained within the new regulations, but it's still complex, and hoping that government will look at latest responses and revise that again. And then there was also criticism from stakeholders that distinguishing between business only and household packaging could introduce administrative challenges and necessitate robust monitoring and enforcement mechanisms. And there also needs to be some clarity regarding the regulations. Government have acknowledged that while the regulations make provisions about who is supplying packaging, potential ambiguity exists around some exemptions, particularly regarding online market operations. And I'm not convinced that the government have taken that on board when issuing the draft regulations for consultation in October. Well, it closed in October of last year. So there's a call for clear definitions and guidance by stakeholders on various packaging types and scenarios, particularly those involving multiple entities handling the same packaging item. And the recycling obligations, it was felt that the goal of extended producer responsibility should emphasise waste reduction and recycling regardless of the waste source. So clarity around obligations varies, with some stakeholders finding it clear but ambiguity still existing, and that again goes back to the categorisation of household and non-household packaging. So there's now, in the new draft regulations, and government have acknowledged this previously, about the scheme administrator's role within the new regulations, with the most respondents finding that the roles and the powers of the scheme administration were clear, but there doesn't seem to be transparency in how the scheme administrator actually oversees, and responsibilities, whilst defined comprehensively, do need to ensure that there is effective waste management services. So I think there's scope for that area to be improved. And so the latest regulations as well, draft regulations, do incentivise local authorities to manage their waste services effectively, and local authorities are encouraged to generate their revenue and are provided with feedback and improvement plans if services are deemed to be ineffective. So there was an issue of resources, but I think that's coming in a pot from producers for local authorities. So to watch that space there. But overall, I think the government did acknowledge that there was a clear call from stakeholders for further clarity, guidance and refinement in several areas, and that hasn't been reflected in the draft that was produced last year, unfortunately. So just moving on to the February 2023 packaging waste data reporting regs that came into effect. Could we go back a slide, because just on the, I think I'm still on this one, sorry. The February 2023 one, which came into effect, is part of the gradual process of introducing packaging waste into the EPR, and they made some amendments to the way that data's reported and created new offences when they were amended in June 2023. So the amended regulations are designed to ensure that, or the amendments to the regulations designed to ensure that packaging producers submit all the information required under the EPR packaging scheme. So key changes introduced by the regulations, and now I'm talking about the packaging waste data reporting regulations for England. So there was clarification of the obligated producer, and the amendments clarified who the obligated producer is in situations when packaging is imported into the UK and then subsequently discarded by the importer when packaging carries 2 or more brands. There was a simplification of the data reporting, so the requirements to report data for reusable and refillable packaging was simplified, and then producers have instituted reuse systems, and they only need to report on such packaging in the year it's first supplied. And they also created a new offence under Regulation 13. So the new offence is now comes into play, and that's committed where a person fails to give the Environment Agency information when the Environment Agency are exercising its enforcement powers under the regulations. So, for example, requesting data information on recycling. When you receive that letter from the Environment Agency, if you're deemed to be not cooperative, then you could potentially be seen to be committing an offence. And then there's additional liability, another offence, where offence is committed by a person due to the act or default of some other person, then that other person may also be guilty of an offence. So that could be, by way of an example, where the letter comes in from the EA requesting information, and then nobody does anything with it, it gets lost in the organisation. Then ultimately the person who is responsible for taking charge of that letter, so it might be lost in admin, but there's somebody higher up who ultimately is responsible, could be committing an offence if that letter just gets lost in the midst of everything. So that's something I think that businesses need to be aware of. Excuse me. So on the 25th of July last year, DEFRA announced the introduction of packaging fees to be deferred for another 12 months. So that was due to start in October 2024. It's now been pushed back to October 2025. And the reason for that was because of the additional burdens and etc. And so they decided to push it back to allow everyone more time to get used to having to pay these additional fees. So the UK government has been working with the devolved nations on this, and it's, I think, quite keen to ensure that there's a uniform approach on this, and quite often there isn't, particularly with the DRS scheme. Scotland wanted to diversify, and there's a big issue about glass being included on roadside collections, and but the UK government quite keen to ensure that there is an overall response that's the same for all of our nations, because otherwise it causes confusion to business. So we'll see what happens. There, nothing's guaranteed, but certainly Northern Ireland and I think Wales are on board with the new draft regulations. So the regulations include a very interesting provision, and I think it's interesting, and that's it will implement the polluter pays principle, which is in the Environment Act anyway, but it is going to apply to producers of waste packaging as well, and obligated producers, and that really goes back to paying the full net costs of collecting and recycling their packaging when it becomes waste. The next slide, please. So I responded back as part of my role at Owen Mitchell to the government consultation on the draft regulations, and it wasn't an easy task because I found them to be extremely complicated. Although you can see what they're trying to do, there's, I think, still room for improvement, as I've said before. But these are some of the key proposed changes, and what I thought were issues that the government should deal with when they're looking at all of the responses back from stakeholders on these draft regulations to implement EPR packaging across the UK. So I'm not sure if anyone here listening today has also responded to the consultation, but it was an interesting exercise. So my key findings were that the new regulations need to ensure transparency and accountability of the scheme administrator. I thought there was a duplication of risks with multiple producers for the same packaging items, and there's certainly a complexity in businesses and household packaging and how you differentiate that. I don't think the regulations were particularly clear on that. I thought there was a bit of an issue with the compliance and appeals process that needed tidying up a bit, and there was a disproportionate, I thought, obligations for the small producers. And there's also a need for flexibility, which I couldn't see within the regulations at all, to adapt to packaging innovations. So new innovations coming through, you know, there needs to be some sort of acceptance or flexibility within the regulations to allow for this, and they're going to be reviewed in 2 years' time after they've come into, or they've passed through Parliament. But whether that review will allow then for flexibility in adapting to packaging innovations, or the government will slot something into the final regs, that's a wait and see. And there was certainly ambiguities in packaging definitions and categories. And then I thought there was a need for an introduction of support mechanisms for small producers. So next slide, please. So enforcement. The Environment Agency, under the 2007 waste packaging regulations, had a duty to monitor and implement and ensure business compliance with the regs, and that still continues through. So it's just solely the Environment Agency that has powers to investigate, and that's been followed through in the February 2023 data reporting, and still in the 2007 regs, and it will be in the draft regulations as well. So Environment Agency normally investigate by sending out letters to what they call free riders. So the producer responsibility team will normally look at what businesses they think should be registered, check they're registered to see whether they are, and then if not, they will send out this compliance letter and check, and then depending on what information comes back, then they'll have a look at that and see if they need to investigate further whether the business should be registered under the regulations. So under their powers of investigation, they do have powers of entry, so you can come into your offices and inspect documents, take copies of them, and then they can prosecute if they think that there's offences have been committed. So enforcement options, I used to prosecute these regulations when I was at the Environment Agency, but since I've left, civil sanctions have come in. Main, enforcement undertakings are pretty much now the civil sanction that is used by the Environment Agency by way of an enforcement option. So civil sanction is better for businesses in terms of like not having reputational damage, cost of a prosecution. You can't really defend them if you should, if you're obligated under the regulations, you're obligated. There's no defence for not registering and complying with them. So I think civil sanctions are a good alternative, but Environment Agencies still retain the power to issue warning letters, formal cautions, and prosecute. And particularly in relation to the new offence that I referred to earlier, the additional liability and refusing to cooperate, those are very unlikely to be dealt with by way of a civil sanction, and most certainly would result in a prosecution. So, but generally enforcement options now are civil sanctions. It's worth remembering that a civil sanction is a variable monetary penalty as well, and that used to have a fine where the EA could impose up to 250,000 maximum, but now it's unlimited. So, and the fines or the level of a civil sanction under variable monetary penalties, they look at how much the company has saved by not being registered for so many years. So if, for example, a company's gone under the umbrella for, say, 10 years, then, you know, they'll expect a higher enforcement undertaking offer, or if they do it via VMP, variable monetary penalty, they will increase the level of that penalty. So that's something to be aware of, and that explains the difference really in the various enforcement undertakings that have been given recently. I had a quick look to see what's been going on, and they vary from just a few thousand, of 3,000 or 4,000, up to one was over 100,000, and that will be because the business has not been registered for X amount of years, and then it's looked at, well, you save those costs, so we're just going to increase the level of fine. But I think days of just prosecuting for failing to comply with the regulations, because most of the time it is literally an oversight by business, not a deliberate attempt to not comply with the regulations, is a prosecution is very, very rarely undertaken. In fact, I couldn't find any recently when I was searching. But if you unfortunately fall foul of the new offences, then one of the risks of non-compliance is obviously operational disruption in having to defend a prosecution. There's reputational damage, there's costs that you have to pay the Environment Agency for their investigation costs, as well as court costs and fines and legal defence. So I think the importance of complying with these regulations is crucial, really. But having said that, when I used to prosecute them, most of the companies would come to court and say that they weren't aware that they needed to comply with them. So I do think that, you know, the government should publicise these more, but hopefully with it all being part of extended producer responsibility, there's big public awareness now about that, and businesses as well, and there's absolutely loads on the internet about it. So I don't think there's really much excuse for being able to say that you weren't aware of them anymore. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick run through really of what's happening in Europe, and you know, in comparison with our draft EPR regulations. So because previously, you know, we are the 2007 regulations, part of the European directive, and there's so many businesses when I used to deal with these regulations that were in Europe or sending imported waste or material over to Europe. So there is still a close connection. I think it's good to keep an awareness of what's happening in Europe as well, and not cut ourselves off. So the PPWR in Europe has been going for quite a while, but in 2022, I mean, it's been amended over the years from the initial directive, but in 2022 there was an overview of it by the European Commission, and they put forward a revision with the support of lots of member states, with the goal of ensuring that all packaging is reusable or recyclable by 2030, and this was part of the European Commission's Green Deal and the new circular economy plan. So it's all very, very good, with some great, I thought, great ideas there. And with the, the targets for 2030, there was some extended out to 2045. But to tackle measures to reduce packaging waste and address over packaging. But there was a vote on these amendments to the PPWR at the end of last year, in November 2023, on the proposed changes to the PPWR. But there's various amendments brought in to significantly weaken the initial proposed amendments, which was a bit disappointing, but you could see why some of them didn't go through. But it was mainly due to the targets being too ambitious, and certain types of packaging waste they thought would be too onerous for business and would cause losses to business as well. So just flicking through to challenges for this. I think the challenges for the PPW are really because over in the UK we've got the devolved nations, but over in Europe you've got all of the EU member states, and there are a few in particular, Italy and other member states, who really were opposed to being too ambitious with targets to reduce packaging waste, which is a bit unfortunate, bearing in mind that I think it's 190 kilograms of packaging waste produced yearly per European citizen, which I thought was a truly astonishing figure. So that was why they really wanted to focus on recycling, reuse and waste prevention. But there's still hope for some of those more ambitious targets to be voted back in. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. But in terms of comparison with our EPR, as is like a broader policy that extends responsibility of producers beyond the manufacturing of a product, and with a waste management emphasis. And so while they both share a common goal of reducing waste, I think the PPWR is more can be seen as a specific application of the EPR principle in the context of packaging, whereas ours is like a shared. Sorry, just my thought there. Ours is more a policy really that's bringing in all aspects of producer responsibility. There is an impact on producers of both the PPWR and the EPR, as they place significant responsibilities on producers, but the EPR has a broader scope, particularly encompassing more aspects of product life cycles than the PPWR. But whilst the PPWR is more prescriptive in terms of packaging standards and recycling targets, the EPR does provide, it seems to me, a more holistic framework that incentivises producers to innovate in product design for environmental efficiency. But there'll probably be a few in the European Union that would not agree with me on that. But I think while they both intersect in their goals and approaches to waste management and sustainability, the PPR is more specific with clear legislative directives, and the EPR is a broader principle applied across various types of products. But there's difficulties on both sides in implementation. I think the recent vote in the within the European Union on changes to the PPWR just really highlights the problems in us trying to be more efficient with our waste management, and the problems that, because of the burdens that it places on businesses and the cost to business as well. So whilst we all want to be, see our waste recycled, reused, and less waste actually going to landfill, it's a really difficult task to meet. And whilst these regulations go some way towards it, and hopefully should go a long way towards it, I think we're some time off that yet in terms of being completely waste efficient. So final slide, please. So here are my, quickly go through that, my key takeaways to help embrace extended producer responsibility. So embrace regulatory changes by proactively adapting business models and practices, prioritise stability in product design and packaging and supply chain management, develop robust EPR compliance strategies to avoid legal and financial risks, engage with stakeholders. I think that's going to be crucial, including customers and suppliers, to align on EPR practices and expectations. Stay informed about evolving EPR regulations and industry best practices, because there's so many changes happening at the moment and we don't know when they're coming in. So try and keep on top of what's going on. Investment in innovative solutions for packaging reduction, reuse and recycling, because we all want to see that. And then try and seek collaborative opportunities with industry partners for shared EPR solutions. Implementation of effective monitoring systems for compliances and reporting EPR activities is absolutely crucial to ensure compliance with the regs. And how you look at those, I'm sure Liz will talk about it, but because the regs are so complicated, so I think that does need some focus as well. And then the long-term vision is to align with the EPR of your company for sustainable growth and environmental stewardship, because with ESG, you know, it's to be seen as absolutely crucial going forward for businesses to be seen to be complying and reducing waste at every opportunity. So that's me, and now I'm going to pass you on to Liz, who's going to talk about all the technical sides of these of the EPR. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. So I'm Liz Gray. I'm a director at Ramboll, specialising in the circular economy and resource management. And as Jill alluded to a couple of times in her speech, extended producer responsibility with regards to packaging is very complicated and not quite settled yet. So I'll talk about some of the things that you can be doing, but some of the detail is still missing at this point. So there's still some gaps to fill. Next slide, please. So just a quick outline, just going to talk about what actually is considered packaging. What is the EPR for packaging? What are the benefits of it? There's lots of really good environmental and sustainability benefits associated with this. How it's going to help with design to drive circularity. Touch on who is obligated and the rules around that are a little bit complicated. Talk about mandatory labelling that will come in as part of the EPR, what you need to be doing, and then things to consider within your business in relation to the EPR and sort of zero waste and circularity more generally. So, sorry, can we go back one? Sorry, Jemima. So as Jill described earlier on, it's about closing the loop with materials and the value chain to make sure that we keep things in utility, that we're not designing packaging for throwaway, and that we're looking to maximise the resources that we use. Next slide, please. So what is packaging? So it's defined as any material that's used to cover or protect goods that are sold to consumers. Packaging is something that makes handling and delivering goods easier and safer. And it also includes anything that's designed to be filled at the point of sale. So the classic example is a coffee cup. So that's considered to be packaging as well. And goods can include raw materials or manufactured items. Next slide, please. So what is EPR for packaging? So it's an environmental policy that requires producers to pay the full costs of dealing with the waste they produce from when it's placed onto the market through to the end of its life. So it's that cradle to grave concept that's been around for quite a while. And the key aims are to reduce waste production in the first place, encourage eco-friendly design and support recycling and material recovery goals. And it can benefit the environment, consumers and producers by saving resources, reducing costs, and potentially creating new markets as well. So we've got to remember there are opportunities when new regulations come in, and finding the way to maximise those is a good place for businesses to be. Next slide, please. So what are these benefits that I'm talking about? So the EPR will help reduce the amount of excessive packaging that's provided. I'm sure we've all had to break into gifts over the Christmas period where there's layers upon layers of rigid plastic, especially toys. There'll be screws, there'll be little bits of plastic twine, all of that sort of stuff. So EPR is going to help drive a reduction in excessive packaging and force both producers and packaging manufacturers to rethink how things are packaged and what's the most appropriate way to package items. It will lead to an increase in packaging recyclability and reusability. Again, that's really good. We've got a variation of capability to recycle different materials across the UK. And we often see innovative packaging coming out that's not readily recyclable in all areas of the country. So the EPR should help kind of drive some consistency and really kind of test the materials that are being brought through as innovative. It will increase the quality of material for recycling as well. We're looking a bit at more standardisation of materials that will make it easier for consumers to segregate, which will then in turn make it easier to recycle. It will also help create certainty in the waste management industry. So investing in novel recycling techniques, strategies and technologies is really expensive, and it's quite a risk for waste management companies. So this drive for increased recyclability and usability will lead to more standard materials being used, which will then provide that certainty to the waste management industry that investing in certain technologies is worth their while and actually going to be a sound investment for their organisation. The EPR would also help address the global plastic waste crisis. So in 2021, only 44% of plastic packaging waste created was recycled, which is not a great number. So again, increased recyclability will help drive up that recycling rate. Again, if we're looking at reducing excess packaging, standardising packaging, and mandatory labelling, that will increase consumer confidence in what they can and cannot recycle. And again, that will in turn lead to increased recycling rates. We'll also have a reduction in packaging that's littered or ends up in bins on the streets, which will be an improvement for everyone's local environment. And it will incentivise innovation at the packaging design phase, so right at the beginning of the process. Packaging will have to be designed for recyclability / reusability. So again, we're getting those benefits as well. And the government's circular economy package target is to recycle 65% of municipal waste by 2035. So the PEPR will go some way towards supporting this ambition. Next, please. So I mentioned design-driven circularity. So the Recycling Partnership did some research that shows that EPR policy accelerated the collection and recycling of target materials to over 75% in 5 countries studied. So it does have a positive impact, and it will help with the issues that we've got in the UK. What it will do is it will incentivise sustainable practices, and those will be adopted throughout the life cycle of products, because everybody involved needs to look at the full life cycle of the product, not just at the point where it leaves their control. It will encourage exploration of eco-friendly materials. Products will be designed with easier recyclability in mind, and this might be the ability to separate different components more easily so that they can be recycled properly, or it might be a change in the materials that are used. And will also encourage efficient waste reduction strategies to be implemented as well. We'll also get a promotion of innovation in packaging design. So the EPR should help drive some creativity and innovation, whilst also balancing product protection and market appeal. So the two potentially competing priorities. However, they can be considered together to get a better packaging product. And we should see an increase in sustainable packaging solutions. So this may be biodegradable materials, depending on what's being packaged, reusable packaging, and reduced material usage overall. And we see examples of this all over the place. There's some controversy at the moment with supermarkets and packaged minced beef, for example, where some supermarkets have chosen to vacuum pack these products, which has reduced the amount of plastic packaging required. However, many people don't like the appeal or the look of the product once it's released from the packaging. So there's different priorities to balance, but there is a way forward with some kind of focused design and marketing as well is going to be important in this. And then lastly, we're going to drive some reduced waste generation. So products will be designed with less excess packaging, because the packaging will have an additional cost, not just the cost of the materials. And products will be designed for reuse as well. And the milk bottles on the bottom right hand corner of this slide is just to demonstrate that there's been an effort across supermarkets to standardise milk bottles in terms of size, shape and material. And this has made recycling much easier for the waste management industry and has led to improved HDP recycling rates as well. So some concerted cross-business, cross-organisational collaboration can get some great easy wins in terms of packaging recyclability without much effort or investment. Next slide, please. So under the reg EPR, we need to understand who's obligated. So it covers brand owners who supply packaged goods to the UK market under their own brand, packers and fillers who place goods into packaging that is unbranded when it's supplied, so that's branded and unbranded packaging is covered. It covers importers who import products in packaging to the UK. Currently, owners of online marketplaces where UK sellers can sell filled or empty packaging are on the list. Also covers those organisations that hire or loan out reusable packaging. So this might be pallets, it could be plastic crates, that sort of thing, and distributors as well who supply empty packaging. Next slide, please. So businesses are divided into small and large businesses, and that's based on annual turnover and the amount of packaging that's handled. And as it stands, those with an annual turnover of less than £1 million and who handle less than 25 tonnes of packaging are not obligated. But as we've mentioned a couple of times, not everything is set in stone at this point. Next slide, please. So the government have developed an obligation checker tool. My caveat to that is it's not yet live, but you can access the landing page on the .gov.uk website, and they have produced a YouTube video explaining how to fill it in. So that's a little screenshot from there. So the government is developing some guidance and support tools to help organisations understand whether they're obligated and what those obligations may mean. Next slide, please. So I touched on mandatory labelling. This is part of the EPR. So all packaging will be required to be labelled using the Recycle Now mark, showing either recycle or do not recycle, which will help consumer confidence in being able to segregate recyclable waste from non-recyclable waste. There's no minimum threshold for this. Everything needs to be labelled. You may be able to buy empty packaging that's already been labelled so that you don't have to apply the label yourself. And all packaging except for plastic films and flexibles must be labelled by the 31st of March 2026, and then films and flexibles will be must be labelled by the 31st of March 2027. These are the current timelines. They may change depending on when everything's finalised. That's the current status. And the Office for Product Safety and Standards will be responsible for overseeing labelling requirements. Next slide, please. So what do you need to do? There's quite a lot of writing on this slide, so I apologise, but there's quite a few things to do. If you're a large organisation, you need to record data about the empty packaging and packaged products handled and supplied within the UK. You need to register for the EPR packaging online service and pay a fee to the environmental regulator. As it stands, fees will be payable from 2025. You need to purchase packaging waste recycling notes or packaging waste export recycling notes in order to meet recycling obligations. You'll need to submit data about empty packaging and packaged goods you handle or supply through the UK market. And as a large organisation, you'll be obliged to submit that data every 6 months. Additionally, any organisation selling goods in the UK, including distributors, online marketplaces, retailers and sellers, may also need to submit nation data. And nation data is information about which country in the UK your packaging has been sold, hired or loaned in. And this means that if you fall into this category, you'll need to look over the packaging you handle in closer detail than perhaps you do currently. So this is an additional requirement that may or may not have landed on your radar at the moment, and it's something that you need to incorporate into your data collection processes and systems. Next slide, please. If you're a small organisation, it's a little bit simpler, but you do need to make sure you record all your data about empty packaging and packaging items you handle and supply through the UK market. You need to register for the PEPR packaging online service, and this registration is due to open in 2024. I don't have an actual firm date for that, but that's the date at the moment. And you need to submit your data about the empty packaging and packaged products you handle or supplied through the UK market. And just a little note at the bottom there that reporting, as I understand it, is not required for charities and non-UK based companies. Again, when the full guidance comes out, there may be some slight amendments to that. Next slide, please. So obviously, we're in 2024. There is a requirement to have collected your 2023 data, and there are still sort of transitional arrangements at the moment. So for large organisations, you need to have your 2023 nation data, but you don't need to report it to the regulator. And part of that is because that reporting mechanism is not available yet. You need to retain your records of 2023 nation data for at least 7 years. Collect and record and report 2023 data for packaging placed on the market, and you need to report that to the regulator, but there's a timetable on the next slide to go into more detail on that. If you're part of a compliance scheme, they may ask for your data earlier than the dates in the next slide, just so they can verify your data and report it to the regulator on your behalf. The compliance schemes, I think, will prove to be very, very helpful for people over the next couple of years while we get to grips with what the EPR requirements are in practice. The Environment Agency kind of appreciates some of the difficulties with the data collection and the timescale, so they're allowing producers some extra time to report if you can't hit the biannual reporting deadlines for 2023 packaging placed on the market. And again, that's on the next slide. And then the EA put out a regulatory position statement back in September last year, just to confirm that there won't be any legal enforcement for producers if they don't meet the reporting deadlines, provided that all data required is submitted by the 31st of May this year. But that doesn't apply to data required under the 2007 regulations. So as Jill mentioned earlier on, it's quite complicated, and the processes aren't necessarily clearly set out at the moment, but there is a little bit of leeway in terms of getting your data to the regulator. Next slide, please. So still talking about large organisations, these are the reporting deadlines. So effectively, you must have all of your 2023 placed on market data reported by the 31st of May 2024. That is the late hard deadline. However, you should be reporting data earlier than that. So the timescale that's here talks about the 1st of October for January to June 2023 data. I suspect a lot of people will have missed that. And then we're looking at April 2024 for the July to December 2023 placed on market data. And then the 2007 regulations sit outside of that, and that's looking at the 7th of April. Next slide, please. So for small organisations who have less onerous data reporting requirements, for 2023 data, small organisations need to collect and record data for placed on the market and nation data, but there's no obligation to report the 2023 data to the regulator this year. But small organisations do need to retain records of the data for at least 7 years. Excuse me. Reporting obligations will be introduced for 2024 placed on market data and 2024 nation data, and the deadline for both of those will be the 1st of April 2025. I say all of this with the caveat that further clarity and guidance should be forthcoming, and some of these things may change. Next slide, please. So what are the data requirements? So producers need to will be required to report all of the information regarding their packaging in terms of material and weight, what's it made from, how much have you got, producer types, so that's talking about brand owners, importers, distributors, packers, fillers, online marketplaces, the level of the packaging, so is it primary, secondary, shipment or tertiary, components of the packaging. So that's the different individual components that make up the whole of the packaging and their weight. The nation data relates to which UK nation the packaging is supplied to and discarded in. So that goes back to Jill's point about the kind of collaboration between the UK nations. Disposal site, whether that's household or non-household, and then waste type, and this relates to large businesses only. Next slide, please. So what will the data be used for? You know, it's quite a lot of effort and potential expense gathering all of this data. So the 2023 data that you submit will be used to calculate your waste management fees for the year 2024 to 2025. The 2023 data will be used to calculate the amount of PRNs and PERNs you need to buy to cover your recycling operations for 2024. So 2023 is going to be used as the baseline. And then from 2025, the scheme administrator will adjust your waste management fees, and that will depend on the cost of recycling and the materials used in the packaging you handle and supply. So this is what's going to help push the design for increased recyclability, and also review of materials that are used in packaging. And then current information is that the implementation of EPR fees to local authorities will take place in October 2025. And the government said that this delay of a year will help, will be used to help discuss the scheme's design with the supply chain and reduce costs wherever possible. As Gina said, it's a little bit slow, and we're not quite sure what the final direction of travel is, but that's the information that's been put out. Next slide, please. So what can you do as a business? One of the things you can do if you are a manufacturer or a supplier or importer of products is do a packaging review. So review the specifications for the products that you have, that you're ordering packaging for. Have you looked at the recyclability and the recyclability in the locations where you sell your products, because this may vary in different geographical areas. Is your packaging over specified? Is it more durable than it needs to be? Have you got excessive packaging that actually could be reduced without losing the protection properties for the product that you're selling? If you are also, again, if you're a manufacturer, you may be receiving packaging with raw materials and components that you receive. How are you managing that waste? How are you specifying or liaising with the supply chain to manage that packaging and potentially request more recyclable packaging, for example? Companies can look at one-way packaging versus returnable or reusable packaging. So one-way packaging, for example, is a cardboard box that you put a product into and it goes off. Returnable packaging is potentially a plastic crate that replaces that plastic that cardboard box. The product goes out, and then the box comes either directly back to be refilled, or enters the reuse chain, and you receive a different plastic box to fill to send your product out again. There are some logistical issues around this, and the initial price of returnable/reusable packaging tends to be higher than one-way packaging. However, you need to think about the total cost of packaging, including the obligations under this scheme. You might want to think about your company targets in terms of waste reduction, zero waste and circularity ambitions, and tie that into the requirements of the EPR, or use the EPR as a driver to help support the targets that you're setting at a corporate level. Depending where you sit in the value chain, you might want to work with your clients to optimize packaging whilst meeting specifications. So you have client specifications for packaging, but if you're a packaging supplier, you can also work with your clients to optimize packaging solutions as well. And then it's that review piece in terms of packaging designs and materials and volumes of packaging as well. Next slide, please. So things to consider as an organisation in terms of EPR is think about your data collection, tracking and reporting. Are you collecting the right data, considering all of the requirements under EPR? Are you collecting it within the right timescales? Are you going to have issues with your 2023 data, for example? What changes can you implement now to make sure that going forward you are getting the right data sets to report? And that could be reviewing your data collection processes. That may be looking at joining a compliance scheme, or it may be getting some external help to help you refine how you're recording, tracking and reviewing data. And the big one here is I suspect a lot of people aren't capturing nation data, so that's something that might need an additional focus within your organisation. You want to think about cost management, so considering the whole life cost of packaging, not just the purchase price. We need to factor in the cost of compliance with the EPR as well, and that may tip the balance for certain operations from one-way packaging to reusable or returnable packaging. I suggest you regularly review whether you're either obligated or not under the EPR, depending where you sit, or whether you're considered a small or large organisation, especially when there's changes to your business. And as the EPR develops, it's worth reviewing what your obligations in terms of data reporting are as well, as these may change over time. And as per my last slide, I suggest you want to take a packaging review to help optimise packaging solutions now, and consider those when new products or services are developed that include packaging. And then next slide, please, Jemima. So that's my last slide. That's a quick gallop through EPR with respect to packaging. There's a lot of data requirements. It's quite complicated, but the guidance should be coming through, and there is more and more information available if you do a Google search to help you navigate some of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was really interesting, and I think it just demonstrates as well the level of detail in these draft regulations and the onus on businesses to navigate their way through it. So I do hope that everyone has picked up lots of tips from Liz today, and if there's any questions, then please drop them in the chat box. I haven't seen any questions as yet, but we're happy to take questions. In the meantime, I've got one for Liz, and so my interest really in the new draft regulations is the role of the scheme administrator, and if you have any views on that, Liz.
Well, it's quite quiet on that at the moment. The head has been appointed recently, very recently, so we've got someone in post now to lead the organisation. But I haven't seen very many details about it, and it's really crucial to the success of the whole scheme to get a good well-functioning administrator that understands the challenges and can help make the process as easy as possible for business to comply. Otherwise, the whole scheme will get caught up in people not complying rather than getting the best outcomes environmentally, which is what we're all trying to do with the EPR.
Yeah, certainly. I think the scheme administrator generally has been welcomed by stakeholders, the principle of it anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out in the future. So yes, if there's no questions, I can't see any coming up. So we're happy to accept questions if you have any at a later date. Just email either one of us and we'll be more than happy to deal with your queries. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to Liz for joining us today and helping us put this presentation together, and to thank everyone for attending. And I hope that you've taken something from it today, and you found it reasonably interesting as these waste packaging regulations possibly can be. But yeah, so if we can help in the future, then please just drop us an email. We'll answer any questions that you have to the best of our ability. Thank you.
Jill, I think there is a question actually.
Oh, is there? Okay.
I
can't see it. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, so Darren has said, does EPR compliance only affect plastic packaging that is used as a container, as opposed to plastic packaging like stretch wrap, shrink hood, plastic strap?
One for you, Liz.
Yeah. So my understanding is it affects all plastic packaging, so anything that's used to contain or protect a product. But I suspect that the devil is in the detail, and that when we get the guidance through, there may be a few nuances. But my understanding is it will cover different plastics, especially with the requirement in terms of films. So I'm just finding my slide. So the labelling of plastic films and flexibles implies that it's not just containers, but yeah, the devil will be in the detail when we get all of that guidance through.
Have you any idea, Liz, just a quick question for me actually, when the guidance is coming through? Because that's something that I responded to in the consultation, that the guidance is crucial really in terms of businesses being able to understand requirements.
Yeah. So I've been checking. I've checked over the last couple of days as well, because these things tend to kind of roll quite quickly, and there's nothing out that I've seen, and I can't see a date for anything. But then gov.uk has changed, that you get these websites rather than kind of technical guidance documents. So the website has some detail, but it doesn't go into the kind of the nitty gritty of what you need to do and how you would upload your data and all of that sort of thing. And the date for that hasn't become apparent yet. And there's been a flurry of updates sort of the end of last year. So I would hope, considering that we're potentially going into an election at the end of the year, that we'd get something this side of the summer. But we all know it takes a while to draft things, so
yes,
who knows?
Watch this space and fingers crossed that we do get something this side of the election, because I think that's crucial really in understanding requirements.
Yes, I think it will just push everything back again if we have to wait until afterwards.
Absolutely.
There is another question about how do the regulations apply to groups? Is it per limited company or consolidated reporting?
You want to deal with that one?
So again, there's not really much detail available at the moment. So again, we're going to have to, and it goes back to Jill's point earlier about how there's this risk that multiple parties will be reporting on the same product. So again, hopefully the guidance will help clarify this. I'm not sure if it came out in the consultation. We haven't had the response, have we?
No, we haven't. They haven't published the response yet, and that was a great area of concern, is that where there's multiple businesses involved in one packaging, and that wasn't clearly defined in the draft regulations at all, and certainly needed clarification. So I think that's another thing to watch out for, is the responses, the government's published response to the last consultation. It did close on the 9th of October, so hopefully, but I mean, it took nearly a year to get the last response published, the March 2022 responses. So I don't think there's any indication that they're going to be coming out soon, which is really unfortunate and goes back to, you know, criticisms of the government in the delays, really. And whilst you try and look at it from their perspective in gathering everything together, I think there does need to be a bit more action on the part of government here now. But I suppose balanced with that is working with the devolved nations as well, and making sure that they're all aligned on their final response. Will probably take some time.
Yeah, I think that's it for questions.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to attend today, and thank you, and thank you again, Liz.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.